I'll introduce ourselves first. I'm Zoe and I work for the UCAT consortium. I've also got my colleagues Rachel and Helen in the background who are going to help with answering some of your questions. I've also got two students here today with us, which is really nice to hear from their perspective. So if they want to quickly introduce themselves, that would be great.
Hi everyone, my name's Ashwin and I'm a final year medical student studying at Imperial.
And hi there, everyone. I'm Katie. I'm a second year graduate entry medical student at Manchester.
Thanks both. Yeah, it's really great to have perspectives from people who have actually sat the UCAT here with us today. So save up your questions if for them if you want their perspective at the end. So our presentation today is all about supporting students with the UCAT. So if you are a UCAT candidate, you're obviously more than welcome, but a lot of this information is about how teachers and advisors and parents can support their students through the test. So it would probably be better for you if you attend one of our candidate webinars, which we're planning for later on in the year. But of course, you're more than welcome to stick around. It's just that this information might not be as relevant to you. So we're going to be going through today the whole UCAT journey of your students from the point you are today right up until 2027 entry to university. So firstly, what do students need to know? And now is a really good time to start introducing your students to the test so that they're aware of the process they need to take and what they need to do to sit the UCAT. So the UCAT, or University Clinical Aptitude Test, is an admissions test and it's used by medical and dental schools as part of their selection process. So if your students are applying to 2027 entry, they're going to need to sit the UCAT this test cycle. It's a bit different to A-levels, GCSEs, those kind of academic exams which test knowledge, because the UCAT assesses a range of mental abilities that our universities have recognised as important for medical and dental students to have in order to be successful on those courses. It's a multiple choice computer-based test and it's sat at Pearson test centres throughout the UK and worldwide. So those are the same test centres where you sit other tests such as your driving theory test. And the exam is approximately 2 hours long. The UCAT is extremely important for medicine and dentistry at university because it's used by most medical and dental schools in the UK and some international partner universities. And the UCAT was brought in because medicine and dentistry are extremely competitive courses with thousands of really strong applicants with the top grades in their kind of academic side of things. So the UCAT was introduced to help universities make decisions between applicants in a fair way. So it was introduced as an extra measure to allow universities to decide who they can make offers to. So as I said before, if your students are applying for 2027 entry to university, they'll need to sit the test in 2026. At this stage, a really great place to visit is our resource hub, which is on our website, and we've got lots of downloadable resources for supporting your students through their whole UCAT journey. So I've got some screenshots on there of our preparation workshop, which guides through our preparation materials and lots of advice for teachers on how to tell students about the UCAT and introduce the UCAT to your students. So next we come on to registration and booking. So registration opens on the 20th of May, so not long now, and that's something that your students need to do before booking opens. So your students will need to go onto the UCAT website and click the link to create a UCAT account. And we're using a new account creation system this year. So even if students created an account in previous years, they will need to create a new account to test in 2026. If applicable, and I'll come on to this in a bit more detail in a moment, they'll need to apply for access arrangements or a UCAT bursary if they're eligible for these. And then they'll need to register to sit the UCAT 2026. Please encourage your students to complete this process early, because if they complete their registration nice and early after it opens in May, then they'll be all ready to go when booking opens in June. So as I said, we have a bursary scheme, and this allows candidates from low-income households to test for free because it covers the full test fee. You need to apply before booking so that you have the bursary, which is automatically applied at checkout, although you can claim a refund if you apply after. Students need to upload evidence of low income for their bursary application, and a lot of the time this is evidence from school, for example, a letter confirming that they're in receipt of free school meals or the 16 to 19 bursary. So one way you can help your students is by helping them get the correct evidence together so that they can get their bursary application approved. We also have access arrangements available for testing. So if your students receive things like extra time or rest breaks in their school-based exams, they may be eligible for these in the UCAT as well. These need to be approved before booking a test. We can't add these on to an existing test booking. So it's really, really important that students apply for any access arrangements they need nice and early so that these are all in place, ready for when they book their test. Again, one way you can support with this is by helping candidates get the right evidence together to support their application. So for students in education, this is often a letter from their school, college, or university, which details the arrangements they're entitled to and the reasons why. So on our website, we've got really detailed information of exactly what this letter needs to contain in order for us to approve access arrangements for the UCAT. And then we move on to booking a test. So once your students have created their account, applied for anything they need, and registered to sit the test, they can then book a test from the 23rd of June. Please encourage your students to book early to secure the test location and appointment time that they prefer, and avoid leaving testing till the last week within the testing window. The reason for this is that if they fall ill or something happens and they can't attend their test, then they'll be able to reschedule to a later date unless they've left it too late. So if they book a test in the last week of testing and then get ill and can't attend, they might not be able to test within the test cycle. So book nice and early, and then you can reschedule if needed. And testing runs from July through to September, so they can choose the appointment time which is most suitable for them. So just to summarise, to support your students at this stage, encourage them to complete their registration early and help them get together the correct evidence for bursary and access arrangements. Your students should be responsible for their own registration and booking, but you can help them navigate this process and encourage them not to leave it till the last minute, like we know students sometimes can, and we all can. And bear in mind that our test cycle runs over the summer holidays. So if you help them get everything done nice and early, then they have the evidence they need before the summer holidays hit, and that means they can meet the relevant deadlines. Next, we have preparation and test day. So the UCAT is a different kind of test, as I've mentioned before. So unlike your school-based exams, students don't need specific subject knowledge to perform well in the UCAT. It's designed to test the kind of skills and qualities like interpreting information, critically evaluating, logical thinking, recognizing assumptions, and the ability to recognize appropriate behavior. The test consists of 4 subtests. So we've got verbal reasoning, which is all about your students' ability to read and critically evaluate information. Next, we've got the decision-making subtest, and this is about the logical thinking and the ability to reach decisions, evaluate arguments, and analyze statistical information. Then we've got quantitative reasoning, and this is one where students often ask, do I need A-level maths? And we say the level of maths is generally covered by GCSE kind of level maths. it's more about their ability to problem solve using those numerical skills. And then finally, we have the situational judgment test. And this is about your students' ability to understand real world situations, the kind of situations that might occur when they're studying medicine or dentistry at university, and whether they know what the appropriate behaviour in dealing with those is. So that was a really quick overview of the 4 subtests. We do have question tutorials available on our website, which go through a really detailed overview and lots of strategies and work through examples of how to deal with all of these different subtests. A lot of teachers ask us, how can I help my students prepare? The good news is we've done the planning for you, so you don't need to do any extra planning, and you certainly don't need any subject knowledge courses, because the UCAT is more about practicing that different way of thinking rather than revising academic knowledge. So we've created this preparation workshop plan, which is available on our website, and this provides a suggested structure for working through all of the official preparation materials. The UCAT is marked on the number of correct answers, so there's no negative marking in the test. So for verbal reasoning, decision making, and quantitative reasoning, students get a score ranging from 300 to 900, which results in a total score of 300 to 2,700. And then in the situational judgment test, they receive a banding ranging from band 1 to band 4, with band 1 being the highest. There are lots of question banks and practice tests available on our website, and these are written by the same people who develop the live test questions. So they're designed to be really representative of the kind of questions that your students are going to see in the real exam. We do advise encouraging your students to practice on a PC or laptop if available, just because in the test centre they'll be using a PC, a desktop computer. So if they're practicing on a mobile, that might not reflect the experience they're going to have at the test centre. Students really do not need to pay money for third-party resources or tuition to perform well in the UCAT. So there's lots of commercial companies out there that are charging sometimes ridiculous amounts of money for preparation materials, but these preparation materials weren't written by the UCAT consortium, so we can't comment on how useful they are, and there's no proof that they help students perform any better in the test. Our official resources are designed to provide an accurate representation of what students will experience in the live exam. So most of our high-performing candidates say they spend an average of around 6 to 8 weeks preparing for the test and spend about 40 hours spread out in the lead up to their test day. We also recommend that you encourage students to familiarise themselves with the format of the test and kind of what's going to happen on test day, as well as practicing the content, because it can be quite overwhelming to attend a test centre for the first time, and knowing what to expect really helps eliminate some of that anxiety, and then they can be in a calm mindset to perform well in the test. We do also have advice for specific groups of candidates available on our website. We've got advice for candidates based in Scotland, because they're applying to Scottish universities can sometimes look a little bit different. We've also got wellbeing advice and advice for candidates who are neurodivergent. And then once they've sat the test, we move on to applying to university. So your students will get their results at the test centre, and they'll also be able to see this in their UCAT account. We also publish preliminary mean test statistics and final mean results after testing ends. And this allows students to see how well they've performed against other candidates within the same test cycle. One thing that we really stress is to check how universities use results and apply strategically. So there's no single score that guarantees or disqualifies a student from entry to university. So we often get asked the question, what's a good score? Will this score get me into this university? but the UCAT is just one thing that's considered alongside other factors like your academic performance, your personal statements, and your interview. So it's not as easy as saying you need to get this score to get in, unfortunately. So we do recommend doing that research and applying to universities that will consider your score alongside the other criteria. So as I've said, some approaches to using UCAT scores are on this slide, and it varies massively. So some universities won't have a minimum score, and they'll just say you need to sit the test, and then they consider other factors kind of in equal weighting with UCAT. Other universities do have a threshold score. So what we'd advise is if your student hasn't met that threshold, don't waste an application on that university because they've said that they won't consider it. Other universities only use UCAT if they're kind of having to decide between two applicants. And some universities use a ranking system where they rank students according to their UCAT score or other factors and select from the top proportion of that ranking. There's also considerations for how well students have performed in the situational judgment test and for things like widening access. So sometimes there's a different criteria for students who fall under a widening access background. So it is very complicated, and we just advise that students do their research to help them make informed choices about where to apply to. And lastly, a note about well-being. So the UCAT is designed to be challenging. Part of the reason that we need it to be challenging, basically, in order to be a way of selecting applicants. But obviously your students' well-being is the priority. So we've got some advice about well-being and the UCAT available on our website. And there are options if things don't go to plan, like taking a gap year and retaking the next year, going through a slightly different entry route to medicine or dentistry, or perhaps thinking about alternative courses. So for a lot of students, if things don't go as well as they hoped, it's the end of the world, and it is disappointing and challenging, but it's not the end of their road if they really want to study medicine or dentistry. So well-being is really important. And now we're going to move on to some of our students' perspectives about what they wish their teachers had told them when they were sitting the UCAT. So first, I've got a slide here from Taffy, who wasn't able to join us today, unfortunately, but she's a third-year dentistry student at Cardiff University. And she said that she wished her teachers told her to book early because dates go quickly at our popular test centres, and they do. But she also said that if you do miss the rush, then keep checking regularly because appointments do become available, and then you might be able to reschedule to your preferred test date. She also said to tell your students about the UCAT bursary. So there is a fee for sitting the UCAT, but make sure students have checked if they're eligible for the bursary and help them to apply if they are eligible, because then they can get that financial support in order to sit the test. And finally, she said that strategic application is key. So what I've just talked about, that you need to understand that your score is considered differently by different universities. So really do that research. And if you're not sure about how a university is going to consider a score, then ask their admissions team because they'll be able to tell you. So now I've got Katie's slide. I don't know if you want to talk through this, Katie.
Yeah, thank you. So, my first piece of advice was regarding revision planning. So, for me personally, I started 70 days before my examination and made a revision plan of every day in that 70 days, just so I knew what I was doing each day to avoid like confusion or overlap, really. And then that brings me on to the next one of understanding the subtests before doing the full 2 hour exam. As already been said, truly understanding what each subtest is trying to get at and trying to see your way of thinking with. They're all very unique to any tests that you'd ever do before. So truly understanding how to do them properly without the time constraint initially, I found really useful when taking the exam. And then practicing the test before the exam. I did so many practice tests before and used the UCAT resources that are on the website to try and get a true understanding of what the test was going to be like. And I replicated the exam exactly as it was done in the test centres before taking it. So I took the UCAT twice, and the first time I practiced on a laptop, and then on the exam day, just the whole setup and the whole using a mouse instead of just a touchpad really threw me off. So doing it with a proper computer, proper pad, and a mouse really helped me try and optimize the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. That's really helpful advice. And now we've got Ashwin's advice.
Yeah, so my advice would be the fact that the UCAT is a very time pressured exam. And naturally, a lot of your students who'd be applying to medicine and dentistry would have been used to sort of doing very well in their GCSEs, getting very high grades, and they're used to getting every kind of question right. And often students really want to get the really hard questions correct, but it's important to remember that each question is worth the same amount of marks. And it's important not to waste your time over those questions that are designed to be a little bit more tricky. So it's important to be strategic in that side of things. Another side of things that we touched on briefly has been about preparation. So it's very important that students do this consistently over a 6 to 8 week period rather than try to cram everything in. I know many of the teachers on the call would be telling their students not to cram for their sort of A levels, but this is really important to bring that stamina up over that 6 to 8 week period. And finally, as Katie mentioned, the interface. So the calculator that you have access to is not your regular physical calculator, it's a digital calculator. So it's important that students practice using the interface, getting very comfortable with it. And that way they won't waste time and they can spend most of their time answering the questions. So they would be my advice.
Thanks, Ashwin. Again, really, really helpful advice from people who have actually sat the test. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. As I said at the beginning, all of this information is available on our website, and we also publish lots of updates on our socials, which are linked there. So we're now going to move on to a Q&A, and I've seen some questions have already come in the chat. It goes without saying, please avoid referring to personal circumstances of individual students, because obviously this webinar is recorded and will be published online, so just keep that in mind. And also, we are only able to answer questions related to the UCAT today. If you need advice on kind of further medicine and dentistry applications, then a really good place to go is the Studying Healthcare website, which is published by the Medical Schools Council and Dental Schools Council, but we won't necessarily be able to answer questions that aren't related to the UCAT today. So if you're struggling to find the Q&A feature, by the way, it is at the bottom of in the kind of panel, and for me, it's under the 3 dots with more, by the way.
I've got a few things, Zoe. Shall I kick off and we'll see where we get to. You did cover this, but there's somebody has asked about students booking a test but unable to, well, they're trying to book a test, they miss that original deadline, and then there's this perception that test slots are all filled up and they're struggling to get their required slot. What kind of advice would we give to candidates in that situation, Zoe?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the ideal thing is to try and book as early as possible to avoid that happening, but we understand that it's not necessarily practical to get online the moment booking opens, and also at our popular test centres and on particular dates, test slots do fill up very quickly, but it is possible to get a test slot, we have a dedicated capacity team that kind of manage capacity across test centres. So there will be a slot available, and we have lots of processes in place if candidates really are struggling to find a test slot. So reassure them that they will be able to test. In terms of kind of tips for looking for test slots coming up, the best place to check availability is through your UCAT account in the booking system, because if you ring customer services, they can see the same thing as you can see. So it's not necessarily going to help if you ring up customer services to try and find a slot. Try looking at other test centres that might be slightly further away, but you might have a more preferable time available. Also, do keep checking kind of in the morning, because as candidates reschedule or cancel and move around, slots do become available. And then if you're still really, really struggling, then do give customer services a ring, because they might be able to search different test centres and find you one. But do be reassured that even if it looks like there's no test slots available, you will be able to test.
Zoe, somebody's asked about advice for students on strategic applications once their results are in. So I suppose it's more advice around that next step about choosing their
Yeah.
universities. And actually, Ashwin and Katie might have some thoughts about this as well. You mentioned some resources, but is there anything you'd say about that? We can perhaps share some of those links afterwards, maybe.
Yeah, so we appreciate that we say to do your research, but there's obviously over 50 different medical and dental schools, so it's not always as easy as doing that. On our website itself, we've tried to link to the specific pages of every university that talk about the UCAT and how they use it. There's also a really great tool that's been developed by the Medical Schools Council. So if you just search for the Medical Schools Council's entry requirements checker, then that should tell you about UCAT for each of the universities. Um, and yeah, again, it's if you're not sure or can't find that information, then ask the universities, because they will be able to tell you. And it is something that we're aware can be improved, is kind of having that information in a central place. So we're kind of communicating with our consortium universities about ways that we could improve that information to make it more accessible. But I don't know if our students have any advice on that about using your score strategically.
I would just say that to look at it in kind of two parts. So you've got your score element and also your situational judgment element. So make sure students are checking for both of those requirements in case some universities stipulate if they look at one thing over the other. And then, as Zoe mentioned, don't be afraid to reach out to admissions departments if there's any doubt. They're very much happy to help, and they're not trying to hide any information from you. So they'll most definitely be willing to help you.
Yeah, and I just found it really useful to know what the universities were looking for to kind of set a bar as to what I needed to aim for. On graduate entry, the mark to get in was so much higher than on a normal undergrad, so it really allowed me to figure out what I needed to do to try and get in.
Yeah, I think it also goes without saying to check the other entry requirements as well, because some courses require specific GCSEs or specific A levels, so students need to make sure they meet those entry requirements as well, before even considering their UCAT score. So kind of narrow down to the universities you want to look at applying to, and then look at how they consider UCAT. And as Katie said, if you look at that information before even sitting the UCAT, it can give you an idea of kind of what to aim for.
So we've had a few questions about candidates sitting the test outside the UK. So both UK based students who might be travelling and also international candidates. Do you want to just talk a bit about our international coverage, because it's a very kind of similar setup, isn't it?
Yeah, so on our website, on the booking page, there's a link to the Pearson's Test Centre locator, and you can just type in the area and find nearby test centres. There are some countries that are better covered than others. If you're really struggling to find a test centre because the nearest test centre is a significant distance away, do get in touch with us, and there's options we can give you. But there are test centres internationally. I think they're in over 150 countries, so they should be able to find a overseas centre to sit the test in, and it's the same test regardless of where in the world you sit it.
And just to build on that, somebody's asked about testing in the Middle East, given the issues over there at the moment. Just want to reassure people we are, with our business partner Pearson, monitoring the situation very closely in the Middle East. And if for some reason we are unable to test in certain countries, we will put in alternative support for candidates. We are able to support candidates testing online in certain situations, or potentially look at testing later in the cycle if we feel things will improve. But we are very alert to that. I'm just looking. There's a question here, Zoe, and I kind of fit that this is quite a good suggestion actually around. So somebody's commenting that UCAT's now the only admissions test for medicine and dentistry, and could we work with UCAS to ensure that UCAT requirements are included on their website as well? And we have this challenge, don't we? And the Medical Schools Council try and provide this information, but it is complex. I don't know if you want to kind of comment on that, but that might be a route we also want to go down as well.
Yeah, it is unfortunately something that is like, this information is not it's not easy to find in all cases, but as Ashwin said, universities aren't trying to hide it from you. It's just that kind of the limitations of their website sometimes mean that it does get buried in amongst all the other really important information. But it is something that's very much on our radar. So that's a really good suggestion to kind of forefront that on the UCAS website as well, because I think that would be really useful. But yeah, that's a good point. It does vary from university to university how easy it is to find the information, and it is something that we're going to be bringing up for discussion at our upcoming meeting with the universities as well. So it is very much on our radar.
Somebody's asked about adjustments for candidates with disabilities, Zoe, and I know you touched on this, but maybe you can give a bit more information about what we're able to support and how candidates can put those in place.
Yeah, so it very much depends, obviously, on the candidate's individual situation and their disability. But in general, if they get accommodations such as extra time for exams or rest breaks in exams, those are things that we can put in place for the UCAT as well. And all the kind of arrangements that are available are outlined on our website. And to apply for those, they'll need to go through their UCAT account and apply for the access arrangements that they need, and they'll need to upload evidence of entitlement. So if they're in school, college, or university, that will be a letter from their school kind of outlining the arrangements that they're entitled to, the reason why they're entitled to these arrangements, and yeah, why they need them for their exams. So do check our website for kind of more details, but there are adjustments available to allow candidates with special educational needs to test fairly.
Question here, which you and the students may take a view of. So somebody's saying that their previous students have said that they revised for 8, 9, 10 hours per day for 6 weeks prior to their test. Is this necessary to obtain a good mark? And if so, won't they run out of official UCAT resources?
I mean, my argument would be that kind of there becomes a point where so much prep could be too much prep because if you've worked, we have thousands of practice questions on throughout our website, and if they've worked through every single one and got every single one of them correct, and revisited all the ones they got wrong and learnt from their mistakes, then I'd argue they're prepared enough for the test. So I don't think there's a particular amount of time that we can say you need to prepare for this amount of time to get a good mark in the same way as for other exams like GCSEs, A levels. There's no kind of set amount of time you need to prepare. It's very individual. But yeah, I'd say there's more than sufficient resources available on our website to perform well. I don't know if our students have got any comments on this.
Yeah, I would add that arguably that much revision, you kind of get to a point of diminishing returns where that could be a bit too intense. And with regards to the resources, the UCAT website has lots of practice questions. And if students, let's say that they're struggling with the quantitative reasoning aspect, it's about learning from their mistakes. So if they're really struggling with the timing, then perhaps they can go practice some mental arithmetic and practice the skills to then help them answer the other questions. So it's all about using the questions and resources available to really understand what areas they need to work on and then building up those areas. But definitely doing that much revision would probably be more detrimental than it would be doing the students good.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think if students also put a time on it, um, that an amount of time doesn't necessarily equate to quality, like learning. Like when I was younger, I used to think I need to do 10 hours of revision, but if I did quality revision in 4 hours, it would have the same impact, especially with the UCAT. It's such a mentally exhausting exam. And even doing a good bit of day prep and then having the rest of your day, you could have made more of an impact in your learning than just spending all day doing it. And I also think when you get nearer to the exam, it is really draining doing a whole exam and marking it on the same day. And it can get overwhelming, especially for students. I know that they would be either revising for A levels at the same period of time or in summer. And I think it's a lot to spend that much time. I also think it sets a good precedent to have a good balance when going in, trying to get into medicine or dentistry. If you spend all day working, it doesn't set a good balance to start off with.
Thanks, everyone. There are a few of the questions, but they're quite specific. I'm not sure there's other general ones coming through, Zoe.
I've just seen one about UCAT scores being contextualised. Um,
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Sometimes universities do contextualize scores in the sense that if a candidate meets certain widening access criteria, they might offer an uplift to their UCAT score or consider it in a different way to other applicants. Um, Again, this varies between universities and is not offered by all universities for all programs. So it is worth kind of looking at the individual universities to see if that's something that they offer. And if they do offer it, they're often very transparent about it on the kind of the course website. So yeah, that is something that is done, but not by every course.
I think Zoe, Helen, and I can answer these other
Yeah.
questions. I think that, as I say, they're quite specific. I don't think there's other ones. I think we've covered the ones which are more general.
Yeah, thank you for attending this webinar today. If you've got any other questions, do submit them and we'll do our best to answer them for you. But if not, you're free to enjoy your evening. And I hope this was useful for you, and do look out for the recording on our website if you want to refer back to anything.